Before I begin the video, I just want to take a quick moment to say that I've always tried to be incredibly careful when I make these videos. These topics can be difficult to discuss, and it's really easy to upset people without even meaning to do so. I can't tell you how many videos I put on private or just never published because I questioned some aspect of that video. Which is why I've opened this channel to memberships where members would have access to all of those videos, numerous exclusive videos made just for channel members, along with early access and sneak peeks to my upcoming videos. However, if memberships aren't for you, you can always support this channel by leaving a tip in the tip jar by clicking on the thanks option, or just hitting the like button because it really does go a long way to help. I appreciate each and every one of you, so with that being said, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into the video, shall we? Recently, the prosecuting attorney, along with lawyers representing Richard Allen, the man accused of killing Liberty German and Abigail Williams at the Monon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana, squared off in court to debate numerous filings made by the defense in the months leading up to Allen's trial. The sheer amount of filings and legal maneuvering that's taken place in court is honestly kind of overwhelming, and at times it's difficult to understand. I'm not a lawyer, and I have no intention of trying to explain those filings myself because I, frankly, most of the time need them explained to me. But this video isn't going to be about filings or legal tactics at all, because over the course of those 3 days, numerous specific details pertinent to the case came up in court, and I think they're incredibly important to discuss. So with that being said, settle in, because this is going to be one heck of a video.
Today marks the end of final pre-trial hearings for Richard Allen, the suspect accused of the 2017 Delphi murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. Thanks for joining me on ABC 57 News at 6. I'm Tim Spears. So far this week, the hearings have centered around Allen's mental health. The defense trying to suppress Allen's alleged prison confessions, calling up Westville Correctional lead psychologist for hours of testimony yesterday.
So much came up in court that I don't really know where to begin. I guess one thing that immediately struck me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, but basically all of the accounts that I've heard about the trial came secondhand from people who were actually in the courtroom, and they went on to post about it here online, which is kind of frustrating because when information is presented by someone as opposed to just hearing it directly from the source, there's always going to be some level of bias attached, even if it's not done maliciously or even consciously. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that two people can hear the exact same thing in court and somehow interpret it differently here online. So keep it in mind that I didn't personally attend the court proceedings, and I'm only able to recount the descriptions given by others. So with that out of the way, I guess the best place to start would be with the defense team's strategy surrounding Odinist, and more specifically a man named Brad Holder.
Defense attorney Andrew Baldwin, in his opening statements, says his witnesses can show the murders had to have been done by more than one person. And here's where the Odinism, or Norse paganism theory, comes back in. He weaves a web of men he believes to be both Odinists and connected to the murders. After all, he explains, there were ritualistic markings at the crime scene. Allen's attorneys, Baldwin and Rosie, getting deep into their theory that this was a ritualistic killing done by multiple people. We've heard their suspicion of Brad Holder, a known Odinist.
The defense has contended in their filings that Brad was involved in the murders and a ritualistic sacrifice to the mythological god Odin. However, during the proceedings, it was revealed that Brad had actually worked on the day of the murders, with his time card showing that he punched out of work at 2:45 p.m., which is a huge issue for the defense, mostly because digital forensic analysis of Liberty German's cell phone showed that she recorded the man abducting her and Abby from the bridge at 2:13, and that was a full half an hour before Brad even left work, proving beyond basically any doubt that doesn't require a massive conspiracy that Brad Holder was absolutely not the bridge guy. To make things even worse for the defense, Brad Holder's job is a full 40-minute drive from the High Bridge, which becomes incredibly relevant when you consider that Holder actually checked into his gym to work out just after 4 p.m., and that gym was a 31-minute drive from the High Bridge. And that's not accounting for things like traffic or Brad walking to and from his car, maybe even going to a gas station. You get the point. That time frame is about as close as it gets and feels basically impossible to pull off, let alone pull off after you've taken part in the crime. However, some online have argued Brad going directly to the bridge after work wasn't really necessary and he could have actually gone after he went to the gym. But if he went after he went to the gym, that would have been the exact same time that people were literally searching the woods actively looking for the girls, and I don't know, that just doesn't seem very plausible to me. But things in the trial continued to get stranger because apparently the time of death had been disputed given that the autopsy performed on the girls didn't show a definitive time of death, all of which plays directly into the defense team's next argument, which was that they contended the girls were actually taken to another location before they were brought back to the woods and then murdered. Specifically citing geofencing data that seems to show Liberty German's phone erratically moving around just after her abduction, but much like many of the other claims made by the defense, what initially appears compelling only looks that way because the defense conveniently leaves out crucial information that would give a much clearer picture. Specifically, a digital forensic expert testified that geofencing data was so inaccurate at times that it shouldn't be considered as a reliable source of evidence at all, and that all of the evidence taken from the cell tower pings and Liberty German's phone suggests that just after her abduction, she walked for a short distance before her phone stopped moving at 2:31 p.m. and it didn't move again until it was found the next day, which is evidence that I'm quite sure the defense team was aware of and pretty much proves beyond a reasonable doubt at all that the girls were not taken to another location when it's looked at in its full context. Then, finally, the defense team brought on a woman who was supposedly an expert on ritualistic murders and another attempt to point the finger at Odinists as opposed to their client. And by pretty much everyone's account that was in the courtroom, this witness was apparently terrible and it was a total disaster, and they were completely destroyed during cross-examination.
Baldwin calls his first witness, Don Perlmutter, the director of the Symbol Intelligence Group, who testified, quote, "This was a textbook ritual murder." They go through common indicators of ritual killings, and Perlmutter explains how symbols at the scene could be indicators. The prosecution quickly trying to discredit her in cross-examination, saying she didn't have all the evidence, just what the defense spoon-fed to her.
Apparently, this woman's degrees are actually in art, and she couldn't cite a single case of Nordic ritualistic murder where there was an actual conviction. But anyway, moving on. At one point during the court proceedings, it came out that Richard Allen had apparently confessed to the murders while in prison over 60 times and had given details about the murders that only the killer could have known.
It's day 3 here in Delphi, kicking off with final arguments in the defense's motion to suppress alleged prison confessions made by Allen. It seems the defense is trying to show Allen's incrimination was just a product of his psychosis. Yesterday, his psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla, testifying she had no doubt Allen suffered a serious mental illness, including brief psychotic disorder during a 4-month period in 2023, which coincides with when Allen started confessing to the murder. The defense wants those statements thrown out of the jury trial in October. But the prosecution says Allen's rights were not violated. He chose to make those statements. He was not interrogated. Even Dr. Walla told him not to talk about his case. They argued Allen found God and he chose to make things right and confess. And his confessions were specific. Quote, "Only a person who was there would know these things," end quote.
However, very few examples of those actual details were given, so it's difficult to draw a hard conclusion on how accurate they were. But regardless of knowing all the specifics behind what was said, I think it's pretty obvious to basically anyone that that looks really, really bad for Richard Allen. Confessing to crimes is one thing, false confessions do happen, but they don't happen with details that only the killer would know. Apparently, Richard Allen had read the Bible, found God, and called his wife and told her that he wanted her to hear it from him first, and then he went on to confess, at which point his wife told him to stop and that she was calling his lawyer Brad before hanging up on him. Apparently, during his confessions, he expressed remorse for killing Abby, but he never openly expressed remorse for killing Libby, which, if you think about it, is somewhat consistent with what we know about the crime scene, where it appears that Liberty German seemed to be the focus. She was brutally killed, nude and posed, while Abigail Williams was dressed and didn't have any visible blood on her. I guess at one point in his confessions, he claimed that he had used a box cutter to commit the murders, which is an oddly specific weapon and honestly not one that I think any of us saw coming. But the right type of box cutter, especially an extendable one, would absolutely be capable of ending someone pretty easily.
We're also learning about the potential murder weapon used in this crime, with ISP Detective Jerry Holman testifying that Allen claimed he used a box cutter to murder the girls. And the defense is also trying to get the case dismissed based on their theory that Allen could not have killed the girls because it was actually a ritualistic killing by pagans who worship the Norse god Odin.
But all of that was later challenged when testimony was given about the autopsy, and it was revealed that the weapon that was used was actually serrated, which, at least to me, at first seemed to rule out the box cutter confession. However, with just a little research, I was able to find numerous box cutters with serrated blades, some of which are extendable as well.
So what's going on, guys? The truck guy here. Today I wanted to do a video about the different types of utility knife blades. This is a question I get all the time, is what type of utility knife blade you guys should use. And I wanted to do the 3 most common kinds at Home Depot. So I was there over the weekend and I picked up the traditional Husky utility blades, and this was a 10-pack and it was $1.97, so really on the cheap side there. And then they had the serrated blades, and these were $2.97 for a 5-pack.
Then, just when you thought things couldn't get any crazier, Detective Vito from the Indiana State Police testified under oath that law enforcement were unable to find any connection between Richard Allen and either one of the Kleins. He went on to say that the rumor of Kegan Kline saying that he waited in a red Jeep while his father went into the woods and killed the girls, and that they discarded the murder weapon in the Wabash River, was in fact something that Kegan actually said. But in the end, apparently none of it was true, and Kegan had lied the entire time, which is insane to me. This guy, a convicted child molester, tried to get his charges dropped by framing his own father for a double homicide of 2 children. Really take a moment and let that set in. This guy tried to destroy his own father to save his own fat ass. It's just the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. But as ugly as it is, it does make sense. And Vito testified that they continued the investigation into the Kline angle even after Allen's arrest. And I mean, that lines up almost exactly with Nick McClellan saying that he thought other people might have been involved. But that's all seemingly over now, which means that if guilty, Richard Allen most likely acted alone.
A former ISP investigator saying he always thought there had to be multiple killers, and the defense tried to revisit another former suspect, Kegan Kline. But with each witness, the prosecution kept going back to how none of the alleged Odinists nor the old suspects can be placed at the crime scene at the time of the murders.
So, this is the part of the video I was worried about, and if talking about how the actual murders took place is something that you don't want to hear, then this part of the video isn't for you. People who were actually present in the courtroom when these details came out actually started crying, so you've been warned. According to expert testimony, Abigail Williams was dressed in both girls' clothing when the attack began, and that attack pretty much instantly incapacitated her, and her clothing was completely soaked in blood. Liberty German was stabbed 3 times in the neck, and the expert witness said that she had put her hand up to her throat in an attempt to stop the bleeding, before going on to use that same hand to steady herself against the tree, creating an upside-down L pattern with the ridge of her hand and her pinky finger. Or in other words, the supposed F tree is most likely Liberty German's half a bloody handprint. Apparently, FBI behavioral analysts of the crime scene concluded that the sticks left on the bodies was something called undoing, which is when a killer feels remorse and attempts to cover bodies in a weird attempt to undo the crime they committed. Apparently, it's really common, and sadly, that makes a lot of sense as well.
So near the end of the day, the prosecution calling their own expert, a crime scene investigator from LaPorte County, who testified that the mark on the tree was likely from Libby's own hand after she was injured. That expert explaining how Liberty German had been moving around when she was injured, standing and sitting, and that she had been dragged. Abby Williams, meanwhile, staying in the same spot, the blood saturating her gray hoodie.
I really feel like for the first time, the details surrounding this case are starting to make sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, nothing about what happened to these 2 kids makes sense at all. They had their lives stolen from them, and no justice here on earth is ever going to give that back to them. But at least the confusion surrounding what happened to them is starting to dissipate, and while for the longest time it might have felt impossible, it's starting to look more and more like there might be actual justice and some kind of peace for them and their families. I guess time will let us all know. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.